Hey, you guys. So it's been a little while since I've done a video, but I wanted to talk about the Steven Crowder, Hillary Crowder situation and a couple of other things that have kind of come up on Twitter over the past week or so. All right. So when it comes to the Hillary Crowder, Steven Crowder situation, there's a lot of opinions flying around, but I think that my opinion is actually pretty unique and should be heard. So basically, here it goes. That video did show Steven Crowder being emotionally abusive towards his wife. Yes, we can't refute that. We don't know how deep that type of behavior goes. Was this, the tip of the iceberg, or was that like the worst possible piece of footage that they could find? We don't know. What was the rest of their relationship dynamic like? We don't know about that either. We do see a man who is being extremely difficult and saying, I don't love you to a pregnant woman, which is pretty heartless, messed up, and something that I don't think any man should act like when their wife is pregnant. I also don't think any spouse, male or female spouse, should be talking to their loved one like that, saying things like, I don't love you, or using like manipulative tactics or anything like that. But here's what I will say. Here's where my thoughts kind of differ from some other people's. So first of all, we know Hillary Crowder and Steven Crowder were married for a number of years before she was ever pregnant. And they went through a lot, including IVF, to conceive. So there's the question there of, when did this behavior start? What red flags did she have? And why didn't she address it sooner, before he became actually the father of her children? That's something very important to, address as a person. If you are in that type of a situation, you need to say, oh my, is this the type of person that I want to be having children with? Based on their behavior, you have time to get out of the relationship if you're not already accidentally pregnant or something like that, where you can say, this is not the type of person that I will want raising my kids. But that's obviously not what happened. So we don't know, was this an escalation of his behavior? Was his behavior like this prior? We don't know. So we can't really comment on that. But I would hope that most people would look at this and say, if I was in that situation and we didn't have kids yet and they were already acting like this, that would be a huge red flag for, this is probably not the person that I want to be having as the father of my children based on that behavior. All right. So here's something else I'm going to say that y'all may not agree with, but it comes from a place of a lot of life experience. When we have a situation like this, where there's a man acting away, there's a woman acting away, there's children involved, and then, we know from Steven Crowder's own video response that there's suddenly courts involved. There's documents involved, there's depositions involved, there's mental health evaluations involved. To me, from what I've been through, from seeing other people in my life go through this situation with other people, from going through this situation by myself, I will say that when it comes to entangling into the court system, it usually takes two to tango. So if you are kind of a person who was in a very bad situation, you have children, you decide to get out. In my opinion, if the situation was really that bad, as far as like physically abusive and stuff, obviously there's going to be some proof there. Courts are going to be awarding one person custody or the other. But in these emotionally driven situations, there are still two parents for the children, and they're going to want to divide custody and have both parents in the lives of the children. This is what I've experienced. This is what I've seen from court systems. So knowing that it would be very hard to really separate, one parent from the children, there comes a point where you have to say, we're going to have to get along, right? In some way, we're going to have to get along and raise these children together. The issue that I see, that I've noticed with different personalities and how they attach to things and stuff, is that in some of these situations where one person's acting one way and the other person has a choice to act one way or another way, they can usually they can usually almost always come up with a way to make this person compromise a little bit. And sometimes that person, the person who would say that they are probably, trying to think in the best interest of the children, trying to think in their best interest, trying to be the fair one, that person might have to give some stuff up. You might have to make concessions in order to make the situation more palatable for yourself, that other person, and more importantly, the children. So that might mean losing some money, losing, maybe the house that you wanted. It might mean giving up some of the custody that you want, that you feel that you should be getting, knowing that that still is the other parent of that child that you chose. You chose that person to be the parent of your child, and you can't really erase them just because they have bad behavior towards you. Now, granted, if they're a dangerous person, that's totally different. The court should recognize that. But in situations where that's not what they're seeing, what they're seeing is two adults fighting with each other, one acting wrong to the other adult, maybe they're going to try to reach a compromise where both adults still have access and parental rights over the children. And you can make that as easy or as difficult as you want to. That's my experience, and that's what I've seen. So in a situation where at least one person is acting out of the best interest for the child, that person is probably going to try to reach an agreement and use a lot of different, concessions and stuff like that to make it so that it's easier on their children and they're not being fought over. And there's not a situation where we have psychiatric evaluations, depositions, things like that. But that means compromising. And sometimes, like I said, losing money, losing a property you might want, losing, some type of parental right or decision-making that you feel that you would do better, because you know that wrestling over the children is actually long-term going to make things worse. So that's my opinion there. People can shoot holes in it, say it's awful, say people should go to court and fight till the bitter end over children, playing, he said, she said, showing video clips of, arguments, things like that all day long. But my opinion is not going to change. My opinion is if it's not, dangerous physical abuse, the court is probably not going to want to say, oh, because of the way that you guys fought, or even emotionally abusive tactics, they're probably not going to just bar that parent from the children's lives. And so your job as the parent who is more reasonable is to make the situation as reasonable as possible for your child. That's how I would see it. And I've seen it go both ways. I've seen people get pretty ugly over these situations, and it usually doesn't go good for anyone involved. Maybe it makes that person's life a little bit easier if they can, if they can actually push the other person out of the way entirely. But did they do the right thing long term? I don't know. Those situations can happen, and that's one way to deal with them. But this is my opinion. This is how I see it. I think if there's going to be a court battle where there's depositions and he said, she said, and psychiatric evaluations, then that means that even the more reasonable person was unwilling to make concessions and compromise. That's what I'm seeing. So no one else said this. That was my opinion there. As far as other little things that have come up this week, we've had that whole Morgan Ariel conservative and Bryson Gray situation too. There's been a lot of fighting there, and I've weighed in, I instigated, I commented on that. But here's what I'm going to say. It's going to be the same thing I've been saying. Morgan Ariel made that post to be inflammatory. She used a derogatory word on purpose that even Bryson Gray didn't repeat whenever he talked about this situation and tried to come to her defense. I never heard him repeat that word, and I don't know, like I said, I don't know if he uses that word or anything like that, but what I saw was her tweeting this, being very inflammatory, and then stepping back and saying, basically just like why is everyone mad at me type of thing. Sorry, why can't I throw these accusations around of saying these people need to repent, and throwing around this type of language, I guess, more or less. And then what happened was an argument between Ant, who got upset about this, and Bryson Gray, and this become a whole bunch of internet drama and division amongst the conservative party. So what I'm going to say about that is women need to watch themselves. especially women who are living in sin. And people can say that Morgan Ariel is, she's repentant and stuff, but her life is still a sin if she does not live with the father of her child and they don't raise that child together. I can speak on this because that's my situation too. I'm a divorced mother. And just because I repent for what happened, for my situation and everything, that doesn't erase the sin or make it so that my child lives in a two-parent household. My child still pays for that sin every single day. And I don't get to go around pointing at other people's sins in a derogatory manner and still try to pretend that I'm on some ivory tower of grace that I've never fallen from, and that my decisions, my personal decisions as a woman, the partner that I chose not working out, does not affect my child on a daily basis for the rest of his life. I just can't. So to me, that would be unfair, and it would be a little bit embarrassing for me to go around and use derogatory terminology towards somebody else and say that they need to repent for their sins just because I said I'm sorry and I'm going to act differently now. Well, that doesn't erase your sin. So you don't really have a leg to stand on. That was my point there. I think that we need to exercise a little bit more grace, especially with the terminology that we use, especially when we're talking to people who, I don't know if it is a believer or not, but if you're talking to people who are non-believers, using like biblical type of, bashing them over the head with your morals is not going to bring them to God. It just isn't. Being truthful, being honest, yes, is fine. But I find, if you talk about your own sins and the grace that God's given you and the blessings that he's given you through, obedience, that is a lot more powerful to people who were not necessarily looking to become Christian anyways. And like I was going to say also, I think females need to watch themselves for falling into this Jezebel type of spirit energy where you're sowing division amongst people and then especially just stepping back and being like, why is everyone mad at me? If you are going to be a warrior for Christ, a warrior for God, and have ideas that you want to stand up for, I don't think it's fair to let that fall on other people. You spoke the words, you decided to bring this up. You should follow through with that instead of letting other people fight your battles. But that's just me. I'm not going to say words that I can't back up. And I would never expect somebody to jump up to my defense while I say, hey, why did you call me out publicly? They called you out publicly because you made your tweet public because you wanted attention and you got the attention you wanted. You got 1,000 followers out of it. Plus, maybe, I don't know, I muted your account because I'm tired of your drama. And I'm watching you basically make Christians look bad. And then letting other Christians have to come in and do the damage control for you and explain the Bible to people and try to, kind of like make right like the mess that you created. So that's my thoughts there. We don't need division within the conservative, movement, conservative party, Republican Party, whatever. People, if it's all about voting, then we need to stick to, what are we voting for? What are the values of the country? Everything like that. These little side issues of who you don't like, that's all on you. When it comes to using derogatory language for shock value, this is just kind of an embarrassing trend that people have gotten into where they think that this is somehow going to bring them clout, following, it's the shock factor. You're going to get a bunch of retweets. You're going to get a bunch of hate and everything. But it's like, where do you draw the line? That, to me, that's always the thing. You can grift on any subject. Like I'll grift a little bit, I'll poke the bear. The Libertarian Party knows I poke the bear with them all the time. I'm kind of done with them though, because they're not really trying to go anywhere. But where do you draw the line in your grift? Like you're going to use God. You can use God to grift, to get followers, to get likes, to get reshares. I'm not brave enough for that. Personally, I fear God and I try to be very obedient to him and think, is this bringing honor to him or is this more just to bring attention to myself? If I'm trying to bring attention to myself, I try to leave God out of it because I don't think that brings honor to him. And I wouldn't want to make him look bad through my crappy messaging when really I'm just trying to get some retweets.